Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the 8th Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door any percent Tool-Assisted Speedrun. My name's Malleo, and I'll be your guide as we embark on our speedy journey throughout the Paper Mario universe. If you would like to watch alternative versions of the encode, either with or without the overlay and with or without commentary, please see the description for the alternate encode video links. If you're watching with the overlay version of the encode, then on the left you'll see visuals which track the current state of Mario's health, items, badges, etc. at any particular point in the video. If you aren't aware of what a tool-assisted speedrun is, please visit tasvideos.org for more information. Essentially, this is a demonstration of what the theoretical fastest completion of the game looks like. It's performed using a game emulator on the computer, and uses slowdown and rewind to redo small sections of the game over and over again. This is separate from normal speedruns and is not meant to be compared to normal speedruns. This TAS is an improvement of 13 minutes and 49.2 seconds, or 49,752 frames. Immediately, you may have taken notice of the game language. In previous TASs for this game, I had opted to use the Japanese version of the game. In that version of the game, there existed a faster method of performing teleported room early, a trick by which I can jump to Chapter 7 much earlier than intended. This method relies on a mechanic with flurry, which operates differently depending on the game region. However, a new method was found by Really Tall, and this new method negates the need for flurry. Therefore, teleported room early is now just as fast on the US version of the game as it is in the Japanese version. Knowing this, the community then determined that the US version is overall faster due to even more regional differences, namely Goomba Trio skip late in the prologue, as well as a faster setup for a super jump leading up to Blimp Ticket skip. I'll discuss these tricks and their significance as they occur in the TAS. And for those who have not previously watched a tool-assisted speedrun for this game, I'll be sure to describe in detail the route and tricks used throughout. Hope you enjoy. Once I gain control of Mario at the Rogueport Harbor, you'll immediately notice a continuous chain of jumps to make my way towards the Crump cutscene. This is a trick called Speed Swap. In this game, Mario moves left and right with a speed of 2.25 units per frame, and moves up or down with a speed of 2.6775 units per frame. I can actually maintain this higher up and down speed value by moving up or down for one frame, followed by a continuous set of jumps performed without landing for more than one frame. Additionally, positioning the analog stick slightly against walls causes Mario to gain a slight speed boost, raising his speed from 2.6775 units per frame to 2.794 units per frame. Though it's hard to accurately estimate, the use of speed swaps and wall boosts most likely saves around 2 minutes throughout the duration of the game over just walking normally. The Crump battle is pretty straightforward. I can deal 5 damage by jumping twice, super guarding, and jumping twice more. A super guard allows Mario to negate all damage dealt by an enemy, and instead deal 1 damage to the enemy. This action is performed by pressing B within a 3-frame window, right before the enemy hits Mario. This X-Naut ambush cutscene actually has a random length associated with it. The time it takes the X-Nauts to move to their set positions in the cutscene is random, thus I had to try to change RNG to get the fastest sequence for this cutscene. After leaving the room, the time it takes the ending of this cutscene to progress is also random. The cutscene advances when all the X-Nauts stop jumping. Therefore, I had to try and change RNG such that not as many X-Nauts are midair, meaning the group as a whole will stop jumping sooner. And with that, I can progress to Rogueport Central. This cutscene's pretty slow and boring. Mario and Goombella meet each other and discuss the magical map that brought Mario to town. Given that I can't read or speak Japanese, it was really nice to be able to read what the characters are saying for this new task. Though the cutscene is pretty uneventful, it does end with a cool RNG-dependent event. During the Goombella partner cutscene, Goomthur the Goomba walks onto the screen. Goombella demonstrates her ability on Goomthur, and then he walks off screen. Even though Gunther is currently in this cutscene, he's also simultaneously walking in the overworld. If he turns around in the overworld as he's walking off screen, he will actually turn around in the cutscene too, resulting in a pretty silly looking moonwalk. This doesn't save or lose any time, but it looks super silly, so I figured I would include it. Just like the previous TAS, the route was modified to avoid talking to Zesty and ordering her contact lens. Since I don't need to talk to her, I can head directly to the item shop. In the item shop, I buy 9 fright masks. These fright masks can be used to scare away enemies quickly. And additionally, they will help with the XP route, as using a fright mask in battle causes only 1 star point to be rewarded to Mario. In the following room, I perform a trick called Fence Skip to avoid talking to Professor Frankly. Goomfrey the Goomba walks within a certain circle in the room, but by positioning him along the very edge of the circle, I can cause him to walk beyond his normal bounds. Luring him towards Merlin's door and opening the door causes Mario to get pushed outside by Goomfrey's hitbox. This skips the need to talk to Frankly to remove part of the fence blocking the sewer pipe. While in this black void, certain collision is inactive, allowing me to first make my way to the right and grab Double Dip, and then head left towards the pipe. The Double Dip badge will be used in the Shadow Queen fight to get Yoshi into peril instantly in order to deal more damage to the Shadow Queen. Though I never talked to Frankly, a flag in the game's code recognizes this is my first time entering the sewers and thus sets Frankly to appear in the sewers and follow me. In the US version of the game, this platform moves far enough left to allow for Mario to get pushed inside the left wall. This allows me to skip the normally required Goomba Trio battle to save around half a minute. As you'll come to find shortly, Frankly is going to be following us for quite a while, so I hope you get used to that. In this room, I only break the right yellow block. Upon returning to the sewers later, you'll find that I can utilize the left yellow block to shave off a small bit of time later on. After revealing the staircase and grabbing the key, I make my way into the black room to obtain the plane curse. As it stands, the plane ability is still required to access Chapter 1 and to reach Grodus' lair in Chapter 8. Though you may think that the plane panel in the sewers is a necessity to reach the 1,000-year door room, as you'll see after Chapter 1, it's actually possible to skip that plane panel and still reach the 1,000-year door room. Additionally, there's a way to skip both the plane panel entering Hooktail's castle and another plane panel further in the castle. Thus, there are only 2 required uses of the plane ability left in the run. In the event we find ways to skip these required uses, I would no longer need to obtain the plane ability in the TAS. Though you would normally visit the 1,000-year door after getting the plane curse, I can instead immediately make my way towards Chapter 1 thanks to Blooper Skip, which I'll explain in a bit. If I jump first frame when entering the room with the Chapter 1 pipe and continuously jump frame perfectly until I reach the boat panel, and then fall into the water, the game fails to set Mario's respawn position. Instead, it remains at the default coordinates, which are at the center of the room. This allows me to spawn right by the pipe to Chapter 1, obsoleting the need to visit the 1,000-year door room and listen to Frankly during the long cutscene afterwards. The general use case for this respawn bug is called Hazard Respawn Glitch. This is definitely where things start to get weird with this game, because as you can see, Frankly is still following us. There are definitely a couple funny side effects that occur because of this, and I'll be sure to point them out as they occur. I'd like to mention a theoretical glitch that, if found, would save 9 minutes. I need to go retrieve the Sun and Moonstone in order to unlock the pipe to Hooktail Castle. However, the blue switches are actually loaded inside the Sun and Moonstone pedestals. If I was to somehow interact with both of those switches and hit them quick enough, I'd be able to skip all of Petalburg and Schwank Fortress. Unfortunately for now though, the community currently does not know of any way to do this. The movement in this room might look a bit weird, but it's actually faster to diagonally move down right so that I can get a wall boost for a small period of time. In the following room, I can perform another hazard respawn glitch to skip the process of revealing the bridge, which saves several seconds. Fortunately, the bridge will automatically spawn once I reach a further point in Chapter 1, so I don't need to worry about doing this a second time. Additionally, I grab a fire flower to be used in the gold fuzzy fight a bit later into Chapter 1, and frankly went for a swim. Hope he's having fun tagging along with us. Now that I've reached Petalburg, I need to speak with the mayor of the town in order to unlock the passageway to Schwank Fortress, which holds the sun and moonstones. Along the way, I can jump over NPCs and fall over top of their hitbox. Doing so causes the game to eject Malleo out of their hitbox with a faster horizontal speed than normal, which saves a few frames. After leaving the mayor's house, I receive an email and a text box pops up on screen. In order to prevent additional text boxes from popping up later in the run, I need to read an email at some point. I'll do so when entering Hooktail Castle, since I have to pause anyway. Coming up are 2 instances of what we call the Schwank Fortress skip. By using Goombella 3 frames before moving towards a loading zone, I can actually bypass the loading zone trigger and get out of bounds. Once out of bounds, I can navigate along the perimeter of the room to skip the normally mandatory Bald Cleft and Bristle battles. For the other rooms along this trail, they're pretty straightforward. The only slight challenge was manipulating RNG such that the enemies don't get in my way and allow me to take a direct path to the next loading zone. In the last fortress, I interact with the Thwomp and start the quiz. There's currently no way to skip this, so I sadly have to complete it normally. During this quiz, there is a small chance that on questions 2, 3, and 4, the Thwomp will ask, "Are you sure?" for your answer. That is to say that on questions 1 and 5, the Thwomp will always ask that. Whether or not it asks this on questions 2 through 4 is randomly determined, so I had to try to manipulate RNG such that I do not lose frames to being asked if I'm sure about my answer. Meanwhile, we have Frankly awkwardly standing next to the Thwomp. Once I enter the sewers, I grab the multi-bounce badge while making my way to the right. This will be used once during Chapter 3. It's also worth noting that it's a few frames faster to go to the right before going to the left, just due to small differences in movement. For both of the fuzzy fights in the sewers, I can end them quickly through the use of fright masks. Oddly enough, items can never drop from these fights, so there's no way to avoid grabbing the fire flower earlier in Chapter 1. For these hallways, it's equally as fast to wall boost off the back wall as walking straight in the middle of the room. Upon leaving some of these hallways, I managed to get Goombella to fall through the floor. I can't really tell you why this happens, but it's hilarious nonetheless. For the gold fuzzy fight, I start by dealing 4 damage through 2 jumps and 2 head bonks. From here, the fuzzy horde spawns. The length of this cutscene, similarly to the X-Naut ambush in the prologue, is random. I used a brute force script to try wasting frames in different places to try to reduce the duration of this cutscene, and moved on once I could not find a better solution for some time. I take damage on the last two horde attacks in order to manipulate the gold fuzzy to attack Mario instead of Goombella, as it's 20 frames slower for the gold fuzzy to walk to Goombella. Afterwards, I can jump on the gold fuzzy twice and use a fire flower to end the fight. Once the fight is over, I can retreat back to Petal Meadows and meet Koops along our way to Hooktail Castle. In this room, I take a slight diagonal such that I approach a fence towards the left side of the room. I can save time overall by using a wall boost along these fences. When I re-enter Petalburg, I can again get a speed boost by jumping over the Toad NPC. Once I make my way west of Petalburg, I meet Koops. Originally, we believed that I would have to obtain Koops and forego skipping him like I did in a previous task for this game. This was due to a trick in the Great Tree that we thought required Goombella, who wouldn't be available at that point due to side effects from skipping Koops. Then it was found that we could perform that glitch without Goombella, so I got the okay to skip Koops. Then, another trick was found which requires Koops in Chapter 7. I've had to redo this chapter countless times, but in retrospect, I can confidently say that I'm happy that I revisited this chapter in order to avoid leaving in any routing mistakes. After obtaining Koops, I grab a mystery item from the bush. This will be used in a bit for the Red Bones fight. In previous tasks, I've used this item for the Shadow Sirens fight in Chapter 2, but as you'll see, I no longer enter that battle, thus I can use this item for Red Bones instead. Instead of using Koops, it's slightly faster to activate both switches with Mario. I pause on top of the left block to cancel the momentum from the bounce off of the switch. This way I can immediately speed swap to the right and hit the right switch with just frames to spare. Additionally, during the pause menu, I read an email in order to prevent the additional text box from appearing when I receive emails. I can skip the use of the plane panel outside of the castle by performing a very precise jump across the bridge. Once inside the castle, I obtain the Power Bounce badge, which will be used to jump several times in one turn. In the following room, I used a brute force script to copy inputs and allow for RNG manipulation for a cutscene that occurs in a bit. When I reach Red Bones, I jump right as the cutscene starts. The length of this cutscene varies just like the X-Naut ambush and the Fuzzy Horde. Right when Coop starts talking, I can hammer, which causes the fight to immediately start for some reason. This prevents me from having to hammer my way through the dull bones to get to red bones, which saves a few seconds. In just a single turn, I can end the fight by using the mystery item and manipulating RNG such that the mystery produces a thunder rage. As a result of Goomba Trio skip, I don't level during this fight. This doesn't introduce too many issues though. To skip the need to obtain the key for this door, I can perform a Goombella buffer in the following alcove, which allows me to fall back in bounds below. When I return to the previous room later, the game will advance to a later state in which the door is actually unlocked. I can save a bit of time here by shooting Koops to the right and just barely hitting the switch, as opposed to shooting him left when we're close to the switch and holding him until I approach the cell bars. This saves a bit of time over movement. And from here, I can reach the spike room and obtain the cursed chest key. The spike room is always fun to work on because of the in-game timer. It was fun to try and shave off as much time as possible here, and I managed to leave the room a few frames faster than the previous task. I'd like to mention that once I have paper mode, I've satisfied the only condition necessary for teleporter room early. The new method for this trick involves unspinning from paper mode in a precise way, which I'll describe in more detail as it occurs later in the run. Though I could immediately leave chapter 1 now and go perform teleporter room early, I actually need to access the Great Tree later to obtain the super boots, which are necessary for the setup to Blimp Ticket skip. As such, I actually need to complete Chapter 1 in its entirety and sit through a cutscene with Punio to reveal the path to the Boggly Woods Pipe. So I sadly have to begin traversing farther into Hooktail Castle. On my way out of the room, I grab the Attack Effects R badge. This badge will cause Hooktail to lower her defense by 1, allowing Malleo to deal damage during a set of power bounces. Now I have to backtrack for a bit in order to obtain the key to access the higher level of Hooktail Castle. You may have noticed some peculiar movement when I grab the Attack Effects R badge, and I do the same here. I can delay the unspin animation by first jumping on the same frame I exit paper mode. From there, I hold neutral on the analog stick the frame before I land. The frame after, I can hold an analog stick angle and speed swap and open doors without having to endure the slow paper mode unspin animation. In the large staircase room, I can avoid using Koops to hit the switch to raise the block. Instead, I can jump on the block and pause just like I did when unlocking Hooktail Castle earlier in Chapter 1. And this saves a bit of time over using Koops. In this room, I first go into paper mode and pause to equip badges. I unpause such that I can begin walking in paper mode after hitting the switch, which allows me to cover some distance when I normally wouldn't be able to. I made sure to prevent Malleo from walking too far left over the edge of the platform. Afterwards, I jump straight to the window, which skips the need to hit the left switch with Koops. To raise this block quicker, I can again skip the use of Koops by pausing on top of the switch. Once I enter the room with Mouse, I can obtain the key to reach the East room. After grabbing the key, I need to additionally grab the honey syrup from the other chest in order to have enough FP to defeat Hooktail quickly. I can avoid this dull bones by repeatedly pausing frame perfectly while moving downwards. I can skip the use of the plane panel in this room using a floating point precision perfect trick. There's double-sided collision for the bars in the higher portion of the room, which means that there is a very, very small gap between these pieces of collision. I can input precise analog stick inputs during a neutral jump to offset my position down to a millionth of a unit to properly obtain this necessary position. This allows me to simply walk to the right and reach the door without having to use the plane ability. After obtaining the last key to the castle, I can unlock the last door to finally reach Hooktail's lair. This spiral was optimized a lot better than the previous TAS thanks to help from a community member named Piston Miner. He made the outer wall of the spiral invisible, and for the inner wall, which is really a collection of very tall rectangles, he generated alternating colors when the angle of the wall changes. This allowed me to observe when I was approaching a different inside wall, allowing me to anticipate when I needed to change my angle to maximize speed obtained from wall boosting. For the Hooktail fight, we designed the route for this fight to allow me to complete the first phase of the fight in a single turn as opposed to 2 turns. To sufficiently do this, I need to perform 18 consecutive power bounces, and if you're well informed about TTYD mechanics, you'll realize how absurd this is. For Hooktail, after the 8th bounce, there is a 2/3 chance that the game will prevent you from performing any additional power bounces. So from the 9th to 17th jump, I need to not get capped. Therefore, the probability is 1/3 raised to the 9th, which is a 1 in 19,683 chance. On top of that, I also need to get a bucket to drop and hit Hooktail, which is a 2% chance. Thus, the combined probabilities yield a chance of 1 in a million if done humanly. However, I can use stylishes between jumps by pressing A at the peak of my jump in order to influence RNG. This can be used to get multiple attempts at avoiding a cap for a particular jump. A brute force script was used to do this, and eventually I was able to successfully obtain both an 18 cap and the bucket drop afterwards. To end the first phase, I can just use coops to deal the last 2 damage. For the second phase, I first need to use the honey syrup retrieved earlier in the castle in order to replenish my FP. With my newly replenished FP, I can perform 10 more power bounces to complete the Hooktail fight. Gotta love the incorrect lighting for Frankly in this cutscene. After obtaining the Diamond Star, I can progress to the first intermission sequence. As a side effect of still having Frankly follow us, he actually shows up during the intermission, and he seems to blend in with the X-Nauts because no one seems to notice that he's there. When I gain control of Peach, I can use a modified version of speed swapping. If I move up or down for 2 frames instead of 1, I can then move left or right for 14 frames and retain the higher up and down walking speed. I first have to enter the bathroom to progress further into the intermission. Then I can walk towards the room which stores Tech, who is the sentient computer that controls the X-Naut Fortress. And frankly trails behind Peach for the entirety of this intermission, which is hilarious. It's worth mentioning that in order to maximize horizontal distance, it's faster to not walk up or down to initialize the walking speed swap. Instead, I initialize it by walking at a slight diagonal. This causes my left and right speed for that 14 frame duration to be lower than if I were to move up or down, but because I actually cover some horizontal distance during the initialization of the speed swap, I actually cover more distance overall. Again, for the Bowser intermission, frankly shows up for the ride. I can again use walking speed swaps, just like with Peach, to walk faster with Bowser. For some reason, Cammy asks Bowser if he likes fried eggs, and it's 1 frame faster to say that Bowser hates fried eggs due to how much text appears on screen compared to the other option. After returning back to Petalburg once more, I grab a Mega Rush P badge for later. As opposed to previous TASs, I'll be using Mega Rush P badges to allow for Yoshi to deal substantial damage to enemies later on in the run. This is ultimately faster than getting Mario into peril, because I'll be able to get Yoshi into peril a lot quicker, especially during the Shadow Queen fight, thanks to the use of the Double Dip badge and a point swap item. I'll go into more details about that at the end of the run. After reading Peach's email, I head westward to return to Rogueport Sewers, being sure to use some wall boosts along the way. Along the way, I grab a mushroom. This will be used within the next minute to skip the use of the plane panel in the sewers to approach the 1000-Year Door room. In the first sewers room, I jump from the stairs to the platform, which actually saves time over going through the bars in paper mode. In the following room, I can drop down on top of the yellow block using paper mode. This reduces the duration that I'm falling for, and allows me to directly land on top of the pipe right after, overall saving a handful of frames. Next, I go into paper mode up against this yellow block, unspin, jump, and use an item. Doing so causes Mario to jump before using the item, and the item causes his jump to reset, allowing for a second mid-air jump. Thanks to Mario's smaller paper mode hitbox not resetting immediately, I can rise above the yellow block and have my hitbox reset to allow me to land on the yellow block. I visit the Thousand-Year Door in order to progress to a state that will allow me to unlock the pipe to Boggly Woods. I love how during this cutscene, you can hear the other version of Frankly that's following us repeatedly jumping while out of bounds. After speaking with the real Frankly, I make my way back into the sewers to talk to Punio. Like I mentioned before, I need to access the Great Tree later into the run in order to obtain the super boots, which are necessary to set up Blimp Ticket Skip. Because of this, I need to talk to Punio to have the passageway to the pipe unlocked. Funnily enough, there is actually a small gap in the wall between the room's wall and the outline of the passageway opening. It's actually possible to squeeze Mario inside this gap and reach the Boggly Woods pipe without talking to Punio. However, upon return to Rogueport, there's no known way to bypass the outline of the blocked passageway, as the gap in the wall cannot be exploited the other way around. Unless a method is found to bypass this wall when coming from Boggly Woods, I sadly have to talk to Punio here. Once the passageway is revealed, I immediately ditch Punio, leaving his brothers and sisters in X-Naut captivity within the tree, which is cruel, I know, but we care about speed here. Now I want to head towards the teleporter room so I can advance to a Chapter 7 state. I can use Hazard Respawn here to get placed on top of the center blocks, allowing me to make my way towards the west sewers. After I perform Teleporter Room early and obtain a Chapter 7 state, I'll be able to go to the Great Tree and access the Super Boots. If I tried getting the Super Boots before visiting Chapter 7, I would have to complete a large portion of Chapter 2 normally, whereas performing Teleporter Room early before getting the Super Boots allows me to avoid engaging in any Chapter 2 cutscenes, which saves a tremendous amount of time. To get up to the higher platform here, I can jump on top of the upward curving portion of this pipe and just barely land on top of the save block. For Teleporter Room early, I can exploit a small gap between wall collision by going into paper mode and then unspinning and jumping on the same frame. Because Mario's paper mode hitbox is a lot smaller, and because jumping while unspinning resets Mario's speed to a larger value instantly, this gives me just the right combination of factors to allow Mario to literally slip right through the gap. Shoutouts to Really Tall for finding this again, I love how it turned out. The first visit to Chapter 7 here is a bit different than the previous TAS in that I grabbed the first 2 card keys on the first visit as opposed to grabbing them all on the second visit. It doesn't make any difference when I grab the left card key, as the movement to reach the room takes the same amount of time. As for the card key in Grotus' office, this card key will not spawn unless you are properly set to a Chapter 7 state, and I obtain this proper state by going into a back room and reading the red note. Afterwards, Grotus' office card key will spawn. If I were to grab this card key on the second visit, then this would mean I have to read the red note on the second visit. However, it was found that because of another trick during the second visit to the fortress, I'm not actually required to read the red note on the second trip. Thus, it saves a few seconds to grab the card keys in this order. After grabbing both card keys and reading the red note to reach a Chapter 7 state, I can now backtrack to the Great Tree in order to get the super boots. While doing so, I need to obtain 2 Mega Rush P badge drops. Upon returning to Rogueport, I waste frames in a specific way in order to properly align my RNG value such that I'll get the Mega Rush Ps to spawn 2 rooms from now. In this room though, I need to bypass the fallen pillar to the right, which can be done through the use of a super jump. I position Koops far away left such that when I activate him before opening the teleporter room door, he has an additional frame of activation delay. This causes the game to initialize Malleo's jump, but the game fails to reset flags associated with this initialization. Afterwards, stepping up onto a higher surface grants me Y velocity, and with the improperly reset flag, I can gain infinite height when I jump, allowing me to scale the tall, invisible wall by the pillar. Then, I drop down onto the arch of the loading zone to limit how long I fall, as my speed is actually decreasing the longer I fall. With a sufficient RNG value upon entering the room, I successfully managed to get both Mega Rush Ps to spawn in battle. Once the Mega Rush Ps are held in battle, I just have to manipulate an easy 25% chance for the badge to drop afterwards. During both of these fights, I use Fright Masks to end the fights quickly, as I don't really have any other means of dealing a sufficient amount of damage. When leveling up, I ultimately want to keep my FP at a maximum of 5. This will allow me to get Yoshi into peril very quickly in the Shadow Queen fight, and there really aren't any issues for any other fights if I only have 5 FP. With that, I choose to level up BP in order to be able to equip more badges later on. Afterwards, I can continue on my way to get the Super Boots. Along the way to the Great Tree, I grab a honey syrup. This will be used in Chapter 7 to perform a brand new skip for the factory room. And it's faster to grab an FP item like this than an HP item, because FP items actually have a shorter animation when you use them when compared to HP items. I don't really know why, but it's quite a substantial time difference. In the 10 Jabby fight room, I go into paper mode in a precise corner of the loading zone, unspin, and pause buffer a jump. When I unpause, Malleo gets pushed out of bounds, and I can then get behind the Jabby hive and trigger the loading zone. Once that's out of the way, I've successfully obtained the Super Boots. I also think it's funny that the dialogue that pops up says you got a Super Boots, though from a programming perspective, I imagine it would be a bit too tedious to check whether or not the item is plural. When demonstrating how to use the Super Boots, there's a 1-frame window where I can jump after landing. This doesn't waste any time, and it looks pretty silly, so I wanted to include it. When retreating to the previous room, it is possible to use a Goombella buffer to get out of bounds, bypassing the need to ground pound the floor panel. However, switching to Goombella ultimately takes too much menuing time to make it worth it. When I return to the 10 Jabby fight room, the game now processes that I am mid-Chapter 2 because I obtained the Super Boots. Thus, the Jabby fight cutscene starts, and I get kicked out immediately. Funnily enough, getting kicked out like this actually saves a bit of time over walking across the room normally, so thanks for that, game. With that, I can now backtrack all the way to the Rogueport sewers. Coming up in a few minutes, I'll be traveling to Chapter 6 in order to complete that chapter, and I'd like to give some background as to why I need to beat Chapter 6 and why I had to grab the Super Boots. Ultimately, my next main goal in this run is to obtain Yoshi, and I'll do that by performing Blimp Ticket Skip. One prerequisite for this glitch is that I need an email to spawn in North Rogueport. The particular email that I use in North Rogueport only spawns if you complete Chapter 6, and thus I need to beat Chapter 6. In order to access Chapter 6 at this point, I need to travel through the blue warp pipe in the sewers. These blue warp pipes can only be unlocked by using these super boots to ground pound on top of large blue switches, thus, the super boots are currently required in the run for the sole purpose of accessing Chapter 6. When taking loading zones, I can actually ground pound on the same frame as when I take the loading zone, which makes for a pretty funny room transition. This doesn't waste any time. Here, I can again use unspin cancels like in Hooktail Castle to avoid enduring the slow unspin animation. Again, for these warp pipe rooms, I use Hazard Respawn Glitch to make my way on top of the large middle blocks. After unlocking the pipe to Poshley Heights, I can immediately fall in the water again to perform another Hazard Respawn Glitch. This allows me to reach the blue pipe and enter Chapter 6. In order to beat this chapter, I'll need to perform a super jump to reach a switch that's very high up in the Poshley Sanctum. To set up this super jump, I first read the note outside of the Sanctum. This sets me in a Chapter 6 state in which the game processes that I've already completed the XS Express storyline. With this state, I'll be able to access the XS Express and leave as soon as I want. Should I not read this note, then entering the XS Express would cause the chapter to start from the beginning, and Mario would actually be stuck on the train heading towards Riverside Station. The entire reason for the need to access and leave the train is to make use of a US and PAL exclusive email on board. This email can be used to obtain jump storage, which is the state in which Mario's jump is initialized but flags are not correctly reset. The use of this email, as opposed to using a secondary save file, like in the previous task, offers a very substantial time save, and is one of the largest reasons why US is now quite a bit faster than Japanese. I used cubes from far away right before acquiring this email, and thus I now have jump storage. In this state, jumping normally will cause the jump to reset after one frame, thus terminating jump storage. So, up until I reach the Sanctum, I need to use walking speed swaps just like during the Peach and Bowser intermissions. Once inside the Sanctum, I can step up onto the back floor and super jump high to the left. Off screen, I hit a blue switch, which reveals the pipe to the back room. From there, I can obtain the Garnet Star. Additionally, this star will be really beneficial as it grants Mario the special ability Showstopper, which can be used to randomly scare enemies away in battle. You're in for a doozy because this ability will be used on 2 fights, one in particular that you would not expect. After obtaining the Garnet Star, I can clip out of bounds and respawn in the center of the room. This saves about a second over walking normally. It was pretty fun to implement this, especially considering Solidified Gaming found this clip right when I got to this point in the TAS. I now return to the Peach intermission, and again, frankly, still creepily follows behind Peach. These Bowser intermissions are really fun to work on and are pretty straightforward. Initially, I was stuck because I couldn't make it past the second fire bar without waiting a large amount of time. After playing around for a few hours, I managed to just barely avoid the fire bar's hitbox and jump over it. For this intermission, I did test grabbing power-ups to make Bowser gigantic, as that would allow him to avoid climbing down the flagpole at the end. However, due to fire bar cycles, it's not faster to do so. Upon returning to Rogueport, I can perform an unspin clip to get out of bounds on the train tracks. Then I set Coops up far enough to the left such that he has an extra frame of activation delay when I enter the email cutscene. This gives me jump storage, and I can step up onto the train tracks to perform a super jump straight to the blimp in the background. And frankly falls below the map. Gotta love that. Upon arriving at Glitzville, I leave and re-enter. When entering Glitzville for the first time, certain flags are set that recognize that this is your first time visiting the town. Leaving and re-entering allows the game to not use those flags anymore and correctly recognize that you're in or past Chapter 3. This allows me to actually enter the minor league locker room, otherwise I wouldn't be able to walk past the guard. When arriving back in Rogueport, the animation of the blimp landing at the station is 7 seconds shorter than in the Japanese version. For some reason, the developers just sped up this animation for the other regions, so I'll get a free time save of 14 seconds since I returned to Rogueport 2 times total. Though there's a guard standing in front of the door for the minor league locker room, I can actually activate the door just by facing away from the guard. For these fights, Jolene will give me a special condition to meet, such as win in 5 turns or less, don't use items, don't swap partners, etc. It's very easy to manipulate RNG to allow for a suitable condition that doesn't impede on the route. Additionally, it was routed that I want to obtain 5 fright masks and 1 point swap from various different item throws across the fights in this chapter. I knew going into this chapter that was going to be a big challenge, as we didn't really understand item throws that well. Essentially, we worked backwards by designing a brute force script that mimics the RNG calls that occur in the game. Through this script, we could simulate the calculations that occur in determining whether or not a particular item that we need will spawn. This was used to trim off 11.5 seconds from an earlier attempt which did not use the script. I'm very satisfied with the result, and for more information on how we accomplished this, I'd recommend checking out my video on this topic entitled Reverse Engineering Audience Item Throws in TTYD. To conserve fright masks, I chose to use a power shell here to knock out all of the Goombas with Koops. As you'll see for a majority of these fights, I want to use fright masks to limit how much XP I gain by the end of Chapter 3. As a side effect of engaging in this Goomba battle for the first time, Grubba shows up on stage even though Jolene shows up for all the others. I also need to conserve fright masks such that I have 3 fright masks left over when I leave Chapter 3, as these will be used on later fights. While waiting for the guard to arrive inside the locker room, I can move around the room and do silly things like get Koops stuck inside a locker. For this KP Koopa fight and the following Pokey fight, I was nowhere near the RNG values necessary to produce an item throw, thus I had to just complete these fights normally. There's not a whole lot I can do while waiting for the guard to activate. Hammering, jumping, or going into paper mode lengthens how long it takes the guard to appear, so the only option I have while waiting is to just walk around. For the Dull Bones fight, it's best to use a multi-bounce, so I paused to equip it. I could have equipped it during a previous pause when in the 10 Jabby fight room, but doing so caused my RNG index to advance a lot farther, resulting in bad RNG for the item throws in Chapter 3, so I'm confident for now that it's fine to equip it here. While there's some downtime for these fights in terms of insightful commentary, I'll take some time to discuss the production of this task. So firstly, this task was finished with a total of 253,000 re-records, meaning I loaded a save state 253,000 times. This may sound like quite a lot, but it's put into perspective when you recall the various brute force scripts I've used throughout the task. On several occasions, I've let these scripts run overnight, so they definitely load save states a very considerable amount in a short period of time. Additionally, during the production of this task, there were multiple instances in which I had to backtrack due to modifications to the route, including multiple times in Chapter 1. As a result, I had to let the brute force script for Hooktail run a total of 5 times, I think, for all the different modifications to the route that occurred. Additionally, when I originally reached Chapter 8, I noticed that I had actually made a text modification for the Chapter 8 intro cutscene. Essentially, after making this modification, the game ROM was repackaged such that particular regions of the game's data was shifted around from its normally intended location. Because of these issues, the task did not correctly play on the authentic version of the game. I had to restart from the beginning of the prologue, salvage some of my movement inputs, and resynchronize the entire task on the real version of the game. This definitely contributed heavily to the re-record count, because I had to rerun all of my brute force scripts an additional time to redo RNG-dependent scenarios. But after working on this for more than 3 months, I'm happy that I was able to finally complete this task. Now that I've completed the last fight before the Armored Harriers, I have 3 Fright Masks in my inventory along with a point swap. This way, I'll be able to complete the last few necessary fights throughout the game quickly. Though I get a condition which states that I need to let my opponent damage me 5 times, it doesn't matter what condition you get for the Armored Harriers fight. For this fight, it's intended that you run away, as without Yoshi, you can't deal damage to the Armored Harriers. And once I run from the battle, we can meet Yoshi. As you'll notice, Frankly is sadly no longer with us. At this point in Chapter 3 normally, a Yoshi egg would appear and start following us around. Then, that egg would despawn and Yoshi would appear. Even though the egg never spawned, the game clears any followers from Mario's party, thus Frankly is removed. For naming the Yoshi, it's fastest to just press start to instantly set the Yoshi's name to the default name. Yoshi's great because he'll grant me the ability to walk faster, but ultimately Yoshi is necessary for the TAS in order to perform Palace Skip, a trick by which I can skip a plethora of chapters and a large portion of Chapter 8. After obtaining Yoshi, I can now backtrack to Rogueport and go to Chapter 7. When riding Yoshi, he has a horizontal movement speed of 3.375 and an up and down movement speed of 4. This value fluctuates depending on what angle I use when moving with Yoshi. Because of this, you'll notice that when I'm walking horizontally, I'll actually be moving at a diagonal that produces a faster horizontal speed of 3.433. Additionally, Yoshi can also utilize wall boosts to further raise his speed. Before heading to Chapter 7, I manipulated RNG to produce an additional Mega Rush P to spawn in a West Sewers battle. This is the 4th and final Mega Rush P that I'll be obtaining, and having 4 Mega Rush Ps allows me to reduce the number of turns it takes to defeat Magnus von Grapple 2.0, Grotus, and the Shadow Queen, so it's highly important that I grab it. Afterwards, I can again jump to the save block to reach the higher platform. Funnily enough, performing the unspin clip for Teleported Room early is actually faster than entering the room normally, even though the door is unlocked now. This is similar to Blue House Skip in Paper Mario 64, where in my TASs for that game, I found it was faster to perform the skip again rather than open the door normally. I encounter this Elite X-Naut and manipulate a stopwatch to drop from the battle. This stopwatch will be used during the Shadow Queen fight in order to prevent her from attacking in the last phase of the fight. Afterwards, I position Koops in such a way that he grabs the item on his ricochet. While doing so, I activate the elevator panel, which causes the item to drop on the ground. From there, I wait a bit to manipulate a Z-Yux far off screen to begin walking towards Mario. From here, I get Goombella off screen such that she activates with an additional frame delay, and I grab the item as she activates. Then I manipulate the Z-Yux to hit me. Normally in this state, I would be stuck in place until I close out of Goombella's text box, but getting hit by the Z-Yux allows me to leave the battle and have full control of Mario. During this fight, I also get Yoshi into peril for later. So this process grants me a state we call tech storage. After this fight, I push Yoshi out of bounds, cause him to fall, close out of his text box, and use Yoshi. Closing out of the text box and using Yoshi allows me to warp to his Y position. Since he was falling, I can reach the lower level of the fortress without having to complete a quiz which grants you an elevator key. This saves approximately 20 seconds, I believe. I was able to prevent resetting the tile cycle by barely making it onto the lit up tiles as they swing back around to the right. With this third and final card key obtained, I can make my way towards the factory room. On my way there, I use Yoshi right before an HP drain lands on me to obtain jump storage. This will be used in the factory room in a little bit to skip going into the background of the room. Once inside the factory room, I can step up onto the conveyor belt to get Y speed and jump over the tall wall to the right. From here, I position Koops such that Mario lands below when Koops shoots out. I pause and unpause to gain control of Mario, then I go into paper mode, pause, and use an item. The delay from unspinning from paper mode and the use of the honey syrup allows Koops to sufficiently bring the card key far enough to the right in such a way that the card key will begin falling. From here, I switch to Yoshi and activate him as the item falls on me. This grants me jump storage again, and I can use that to perform a super jump by walking onto the scooter here. This skips the need to go into the background, get back to the higher platform, reveal the stairs, and climb the stairs to Magnus Von Grapple 2.0. This saves about 20 seconds. In actuality, it saves more time in the factory room itself, but because this trick requires Koops, it leads to substantial differences in the route. Some time is lost from not being able to skip Koops. While setting up that last super jump, I equipped all my Mega Rush badges in the pause menu. Thus, I can simply perform 4 ground pounds with Yoshi and take out Magnus Von Grapple 2.0 in one turn. I was able to activate the Sanctum door with Bowser a lot earlier than the previous task. Part of the issue is that when you let go of the analog stick, Bowser is actually slowly moving still, which prevents you from being able to open the door. By pressing A and B on the same frame, Bowser immediately stops moving to breathe fire, and he can activate the door too. Once I've returned to Mario's perspective, I have to head down a sublevel to speak with Tech. For the elevators, it's fastest to activate the elevator as far to the left as possible, because this reduces the amount of time it takes for Mario and Yoshi to walk in the center of the elevator, allowing the elevator to spawn more quickly. I find it really odd that in order to generate this randomized screen static, the game actually calls RNG around 30,000 times per frame. This seems like a pretty inefficient way at handling this static, but hey, whatever works, I guess. After tech shuts off, I can backtrack to the teleporter and make my way back to Rogueport so I can advance to Chapter 8. After speaking with Frankly, I use Yoshi. Instead of the normally long animation of Mario hopping off of Yoshi, I can hop off right when I enter this email cutscene. This causes Mario to immediately hop off Yoshi and land on the ground. This gives me jump storage, but I don't actually need it for anything. There's a pipe that can take me to the 1,000-year door room, but the path to it is covered up by a wall that is only removable with the use of Flurry. Since I skipped obtaining her, I have to perform a very precise jump along the water to reach the boat panel and walk to the pipe. It was pretty fun to work on this and implement it. In just an hour and 23 minutes, I've reached Chapter 8 by only obtaining 3 of the 7 crystal stars. Onward to Chapter 8. The beginning of this chapter is pretty straightforward. I use Yoshi as often as possible and utilize wall boosts to give myself additional speed. By using paper mode and some careful movement, I can squeeze in between the two gold bill blasters to avoid encountering them. I can avoid taking a sharp upright angle around the last set of spikes by squeezing in between the two diagonal sets at the end of the room. There is a hazard respawn glitch I can perform in this room to spawn in the center of the room, but this loses a few seconds over just walking normally. For the fire bars, I can use some careful angling to make it around the fire bars, which normally require tube mode. For unknown reasons, I can't perform the same early battle glitch like I did with Red Bones. These two cutscenes operate differently for some reason. Additionally, it appears that the cutscene of the Dry Bones falling does not have a random length, unlike the Dull Bones cutscene back in Chapter 1. I hammer some Dry Bones away, hop on Yoshi, and encounter Dark Bones. For this fight, it's fastest to manipulate Showstopper to kill all the enemies instantly. I intentionally fail the first action command in order to speed up the attack. Missing the action command lowers the accuracy of Showstopper, but I was sufficiently able to manipulate RNG to allow them to all die from it. I upgrade BP to be able to equip Double Dip later, in addition to the Mega Rushes later on. Just like before, I can bypass both sets of the Gold Bill Blasters by using Paper Mode. For this staircase maze room, the order is as follows: down, down, up, down, up, and down. The rooms are pretty straightforward, and I just try to maximize my speed by utilizing wall boosts. Thanks to Palace Skip, I can avoid visiting Riddle Tower, which means I don't need Boat Mode, the Ultra Hammer, Vivian, Bobbery, or the Ultra Boots. For Palace Skip, I first encounter the left ember and use a brute force script to manipulate an item drop. It doesn't matter what the item is, but I just need it to set up text storage. I then perform a delayed Goombella buffer into the item by setting Goombella far enough off screen, and I do so very close to the other ember. This way I can immediately enter and leave the battle to gain control of Mario again. Then I traverse to the bottom left corner of the room, push Yoshi out of bounds, and perform a Yoshi teleport to warp down to his Y position. There's a spring that normally exists for a portion of this room that is not currently loaded, and conveniently, the spring remains loaded. I use this to land on the seam of the room, and I equip Double Dip, swap to Koops, and set him up within the ember's range of movement. Then I use the spring to land behind the left door, jump towards the top left corner of the room, and release Koops to hit the Ember. After running away from the fight, I can perform a double jump mid-air to just barely land on the back seam of the room. From here, I can simply walk to a loading zone beneath the floor to advance to the end of the chapter. This method saves a bit of time over the previously used method in the TAS because it skips one battle encounter. After grabbing the key, the game recognizes that I'm at the end of the chapter and loads the previously unloaded portion of the room. I take the plane panel straight to Grotus' lair. Though it's a small detail, I activate the plane panel on the very lower edge of it. Doing so causes the game to not restrict the pitch of Malleo's airplane while above the plane panel, allowing me to nosedive immediately and therefore gain a lot more speed early on. During the Grotus fight, I need to get Yoshi into peril, and I can do so by having him get hit by Grotus' lightning and a Grotus X. Afterwards, I jump twice on a Grotus X to kill it and remove Grotus' shield. From here, I can simply perform 4 ground pounds with Yoshi to defeat Grotus. Though we don't necessarily need more BP, it's still important to not upgrade FP, as that'll make getting Yoshi into peril a much slower process. You may not expect this, but Bowser and Cammy are actually susceptible to Showstopper. For a failed Showstopper, they both have a 2% chance of dying, so the combined probability of them getting hit is a 1 in 2,500 chance. Oddly enough, I managed to get this scenario by only wasting 2 frames, I believe. Instead of walking towards the Shadow Queen normally, I can perform something called the Gloomtail Warp, and I head back left to perform this. This is a very complex trick to explain, so I'm going to start now. First, I jump on the spring to reach the higher platform. Then I hop on Yoshi, hit the spring twice, and on the second hit, I hop off of Yoshi. Because the spring is still oscillating when I land the second time, this allows me to get jump storage. I can't control Malleo during this initial bounce, so I position him under the door frame to limit how much height I get. Then I hit the spring and land back up. From here, I go into paper mode, hit the spring, and then hold neutral, R, and press A and Y on the same frame to activate the plane panel. Doing so maintains my jump storage and paper mode. From here, I spam left over the plane panel, which for some reason allows me to gain much more height than normal, allowing me to translate this into horizontal speed to get to the door frame quicker. Because I'm in a weird state of paper mode, I can actually land on the door frame. I get out of this weird paper mode state and then re-enter a normal paper mode state. From here, I step up onto a higher portion of the arch to get Y velocity, and I can super jump all the way to Gloomtail's room. Entering this room in the game's current state starts a cutscene that occurs in this room, involving Frankly. Finishing this cutscene places us at a point right before the first phase of the Shadow Queen battle, saving around 2.5 minutes. For the first phase, I need to deal 61 damage to advance to the next phase. To do so, I need to get Yoshi into peril. I can do this by manipulating the audience to hit Yoshi on turn 1. Then I let the Shadow Queen strike Yoshi. Afterwards, I have the audience hit Yoshi one more time to bring him into peril. Then I can just perform 4 ground pounds. Once the Shadow Queen transforms, I need to attack her 3 separate times. I first jump with Mario. For some reason, attacking with partners does not count as a hit, so I manipulate a boo from the audience to attack the Shadow Queen, which actually counts as the second hit. Afterwards, I land another hit with Mario to end this phase of the fight. I can't help but feel so happy over the fact that at this point, there are so many characters in this cutscene that we have never actually encountered throughout this TAS. It's amazing how much the community has broken this game. Here I use double dip with a point swap. Double dip costs 4 FP, which brings me down to 1 FP. Then the point swap switches Yoshi's health with my FP, therefore setting his health to 1. I then use the stopwatch obtained during Chapter 7 to make the Shadow Queen and her hands fall asleep, preventing her from attacking after this turn. I then perform 4 ground pounds to deal half of her health. And on the following turn, I again use 4 ground pounds and successfully defeat the Shadow Queen. For this cutscene, the game never performs checks to see if you've actually obtained all the partners, therefore twice as many partners show up as I actually had throughout the TAS. I know that I have made so many TASes for this game, and a lot of people ask me why I'm willing to put myself through that so many times. I have to be honest in saying that I really enjoy creating these to show off new glitch discoveries made by the community, and show how crazy this game's speedrun has become. I love being able to face a problem, whether it's the Mega Rush P drops or the Chapter 3 audience item throws, struggle with it, and then succeed in solving the problem. TASing isn't easy, and it's not for everyone, but I'm happy that I've found and stuck with one of my biggest passions for so long. The first TAS I helped make for this game was almost 7 years ago at the time of uploading this, and we finished with a time of 4 hours, 52 minutes, and 30 seconds. It's crazy to think that if you were to play this new TAS 3 times, I would have defeated the Chapter 7 boss on the 3rd playthrough by the time the first TAS finishes the game. It's just insane that the game has reached this point. At the time of uploading, this TAS is now faster than 9th place for Paper Mario 64 any percent RTA, if you were to time this TAS using the RTA method. The time gap between Paper Mario 64 and TTYD is shrinking, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we find that TTYD can be completed faster than PM64. I'd really like to thank everyone who has supported me throughout the development of this TAS. I was lucky enough to become partnered on Twitch during the creation of this TAS. A lot of people expressed their interest and investment for the development of this TAS, and I can't thank everyone enough, and I can't express how much it means to receive this level of support. Thank you all for what you do. Additionally, I want to thank Solidified Gaming for his various glitch discoveries over the years, including the newly added super jump in the factory room in Chapter 7, Really Tall for being the first to perform the new teleported room early method, and ultimately being the sole reason that this TAS was able to happen. I want to thank Muzz Yoshi for the thumbnail and intro image for this TAS. I want to thank Vaniv for routing. I want to thank JD Aster and Trivial171 for contributing to RNG manipulation procedures. Without them, I would have undoubtedly lost tens of seconds throughout Chapter 3 and for the Mega Rush P-drops. I want to thank Piston Miner for his help in making the Hooktail Castle spiral easier to optimize, and for offering insight about the best ways to go about brute forcing the RNG. I want to thank Cool Kirby 2000 and Master June for their generosity in allowing me to work with them for the first TTYD TAS. Had they not welcomed me aboard the project with open arms, I may not have continued on to develop these TASs. I want to thank you, the viewer, for watching all the way through. I genuinely hope you found this TAS to be entertaining. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah.
The final TAS timing is 1 hour, 47 minutes, and 9.03 seconds. RTA timing for this TAS is 1 hour, 46 minutes, and 53.22 seconds. Until next time, have a good one.